अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला हबीबिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला करीमिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला हबीबिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन बलगल उला बिकमालिही कशफद्दुजा बिजमालिही बलगल उला बिकमालिही कशफद्दुजा बिजमालिही हसन जमीओ खिसालिही सल्लु अलैहि सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला हबीबिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला हबीबिना सल्ले अला सल्ले अला रहीमिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला करीमिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला हबीबिना सल्ले अला सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला हबीबिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला रहीमिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला करीमिना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला नबीना सल्ले अला मुहम्मदिन सल्ले अला हबीबिना सल्ले अला बलगल उला बिकमालिही कशफत दुजा बिजमालिही बलगल उला बिकमालिही कशफत दुजा बिजमालिही حسن جميع خصاله صلوا عليه وآله صل على نبينا صل على
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. Please be seated. Please be seated.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Beth El Fatou Mosque and to the National Peace Symposium. Before we start our formal proceedings, just a housekeeping announcement. We are not expecting a fire drill, but should the fire alarm go off, please use the fire exits to the sides of the hall, in Tire Hall, and the convening places at the back in the car park. If you are in Nasser Hall, then please leave from the exit at the front and convene at the front of the building. Also, a request to please kindly switch your mobile phones off. We will now start the formal proceedings, and we will start with the recitation of the Holy Quran in Arabic, and I would like to request Mr. Nafis Ahmed Qamar to deliver the recitation, followed by the translation in English by Hazim Ahmed Arif.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيراً.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. The verse recited before you today has been taken from chapter 4, verse 136 of the Holy Quran. The English translation is as follows: I seek refuge with Allah from Satan the accursed. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. O ye who believe, be strict in observing justice, and be witnesses for Allah, even though it be against yourselves or against your parents and kindred. Whether he against whom witness is borne be rich or poor, Allah is more regardful of them both than you are. Therefore, follow not your low desires, that you may be able to act equitably. And if you hide the truth or evade it, then remember that Allah is all aware of what you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have our first speaker, and I invite the National President of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community UK, Mr. Rafiq Hayat, to give the welcome address.
A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Beloved Hazur, respected guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. May peace and blessings of Allah be upon you all. I'm delighted to welcome you to the 18th National Peace Symposium of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community, UK. As you will no doubt be aware that this year's event is being held at a time of great significance due to the raging conflicts around the world. It is deeply distressing that last year's event was held as the Russia-Ukraine war was raging, and sadly, not only is that still the case, but it has been added to by horrific situation in Israel and Palestine. The horrific acts of October the 7th have been compounded by the onslaught of people of Gaza. The conflict has seen nearly 30,000 people killed, mostly women and children. And we are witnessing unbearable scenes on our screens of innocent children being killed by the bombing. I don't think any of us are unaffected with such horrific scenes, and this has made it all the more worse with the tragic suffering due to the lack of aid reaching those in need. The response of the international community has seen immense support for the victims of war, but such sympathy has been sorely lacking from our political leadership, almost as if there was no genuine desire to end the conflict. We must stop the suffering and have an immediate ceasefire so that the killing stops, hostages are released, and people can get food, water, and medicine to give them a chance of survival. His Holiness has repeatedly warned for the past 2 decades that there is growing risk of national and regional conflicts spreading and engulfing the entire world in a devastating nuclear conflict. We have unfortunately witnessed the risk growing ever more acute, and talk of a third world war is sadly now a commonplace. It is now more than ever that the world needs principled leadership for the global peace and the events today focus on that, to seek how we can build a sustainable peace so that it is not just for today, but for the future too. In this regard, we're deeply honored that His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, may Allah be his helper, the fifth Caliph and the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, is with us this evening. He has consistently raised his voice for peace in parliaments across the world, including the UK, EU, Capitol Hill, and in Holland, New Zealand, as well as numerous other forums. His Holiness is a champion for the cause of peace and works tirelessly for this objective and for the sake of humanity. I think we can all agree that in these times there can be no greater objective. So I again thank you all for being with us today, and I pray that in our discourse today we can revitalize our commitment to peace and at all levels and become a true family that respects each other, helps each other, and works together for the cause of peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rafiq Hayat. And if you wish to show your appreciation by clapping, you may do so. But it's not obligatory. We have a number of guest speakers, and I'm delighted to welcome our first guest speaker today, Dame Siobhan McDonough, MP. She is a long-standing friend of the community and has been a Member of Parliament for Mitcham and Morden since 1997, and she serves on the Treasury Committee and is also the chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Ahmadiyya Muslim Community. She was appointed Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire in the 2024 New Year's Honours List for her parliamentary and political service. We're delighted to welcome her, Dame Siobhan McDonough.
Good evening, everybody. It's a privilege to be with the Ahmadi community this evening. I am honoured to be around so many friends, community leaders, and most importantly, that His Holiness is able to deliver the keynote speech. The themes for tonight's event is building a sustainable peace, and we all know that there is only one place to start, and it is with pain and sadness. The pain and sadness of war that has been going on for far too long. It is now 154 days since the appalling war began, and since that day, the killing has gone on. Flattened cities and refugee camps and hostages in chains. I'm sure you are with me in saying that not a day has gone by without being horrified by the images of war in Gaza. My thoughts are squarely with everyone who is suffering at this very moment. Gaza's hospitals have been devastated, and victims who survived the bombings now face a complete lack of medical facilities. Disease and hunger are rife, with very little aid being allowed to reach those in desperate need. Before the crisis, about 500 trucks a day were getting in, and today the figure is less than 95. The destruction of at least 16 cemeteries add further to the horrors of the attacks in Gaza. With all of the destruction happening before our eyes on TV and on our phone screens, there has never been a more important time to come together to express our common desire for the fighting to stop. I know that as a national politician, I have a duty to be part of the call for peace. Let me be clear. The Labour Party is calling for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire, and when that ceasefire comes, we do not want to see the fighting restart. I'm no expert in foreign policy, and I'm certainly not the Foreign Secretary, but I can join with everyone here today in saying that we want the agony and the fighting to stop. And what better place to make that plea? The Ahmadi community has been at the forefront of calling for peace since the very start of the conflict. It is His Holiness who urged all world powers to de-escalate and work towards a lasting, peaceful solution. I know that Prayers for Peace event was hosted, bringing communities together to stand in solidarity with victims of the conflict. With a war that seems like it will never end in Gaza, the tensions have simmered over into the UK. According to statistics, there has been more than a 600% rise in Islamophobic incidents in the UK, including both verbal and physical abuse as well as vandalism. Sadly, many people here today will have experienced this. At a time when anti-Muslim hatred is on the rise, I find myself becoming more and more thankful for the work of the Ahmadiyya Muslims building trust and cohesion in our communities. We all have a focus on resolving the bigger issues, but we have a group here that is holding communities together and building resilience at home. The unique motto of love for all, hatred for none has never been more important. I want to finish by saying that I am not an expert in Middle Eastern politics, but I have seen another conflict closer to home that I thought would never end. I saw over many decades in Northern Ireland that a ceasefire is not the final destination, but a step on the road to a lasting peace, one that requires hard negotiation and a roadmap for political process. There is no way out of the crisis without the hope that both Palestinians and Israelis have a path to security, justice, and an opportunity in lands that they can call their own. Hamas and Israeli hardliners want to bury a two-state solution, and we need to show that we will not let that happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Dame Siobhan McDonough. Our next guest speaker is Jonathan Lord MP. Jonathan has been serving as the Member of Parliament for Woking since 2010 and has previously held senior roles in government with interests across the piece in health, education and businesses. He's a very close friend of the community and also serves as the Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. We're delighted to welcome here and I invite him to say a few words. Jonathan Lord.
Your Holiness, Mr. President, distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of the residents and communities of Woking and of Surrey, and on behalf of the Conservative Party, I extend my heartfelt congratulations to you on the occasion of the 18th Annual Peace Symposium at this Western Europe's largest and most impressive mosque. Your commitment to promoting peace, justice, and tolerance across the world is truly commendable. With the recent rise in Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, I want to extend my heartfelt support and solidarity to you during these very challenging times. It also pains me to know that your community continues to face persecution in Pakistan and around the world. In the face of such uncertainties in the international situation, Your Holiness and your community have been true beacons of peace, reminding us of the values that should unite us all. The shared belief in freedom, the right to choose, and the freedom to worship. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community's motto of love for all, hatred for none is truly wonderful and more needed at this time than at many times in the recent past. And it should resonate with people of all faiths, all religions, and those of none. So my very best wishes go out to all of you participating at this peace conference. May it be a moment of strength and of unity, reinforcing the importance of peace and love in our world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan Lord. Our next guest speaker is the Right Honourable Sir Ed Davey MP, the leader of the Liberal Democrats Party. He was knighted in the 2016 New Year's Honours List for his service to political and public service, and has previously served as the Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, and is also a Vice Chair of the APPG for the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Sir Ed is a long-standing friend of the community. We're delighted he's here, and I invite him to say a few words. Sir Ed Davey.
Assalamu alaikum. Like many of you, I've had the privilege and honour to attend many other peace symposiums here at the mosque and to listen to His Holiness and to work with the Ahmadi community for peace. That has never been as important as it is this year. We see war and conflict across the world. We see it in Sudan. We see it in Yemen. Of course, we see it in Ukraine, and we see it in the Middle East, in Gaza. And we need to redouble our efforts for our country to play its role in bringing an end to these wars and to these conflicts. And that's why we're looking forward to the keynote speech of His Holiness tonight. When it comes to what's happening in Ukraine, it is with fear and foreboding that we approach the next few weeks and months as the prospect of a further Russian assault on East Ukraine becomes ever more likely. I and my wife host a Ukrainian refugee, a young medical student from Odessa, and to hear her fear of the future for her country, for her father who is out there, brings home to you the sheer horror of the war in Ukraine. But of course, all our thoughts in recent months have been with what's been happening in Israel and Gaza. I visited Gaza in January, I think it's February 2009, after Gaza had been bombed by the Israelis and there'd been war with Hamas rockets on Israel back then. It was horrific to see the devastation on hospitals and schools and homes with the bombing back then. But it was nothing compared to what we are seeing daily on our television screens. And our hearts and minds go out to the people who are suffering from the bombs, the bullets, and have little or no food or medicine or even water. We must hold them in our hearts tonight. I've actually just come back from a visit to Israel and Palestine. I wasn't able to go to Gaza, of course. But I saw the trauma of both peoples. I met an Israeli father in Tel Aviv who told me about his two grown-up sons held hostage by Hamas and the suffering he's endured every single minute since they were taken. And I met Palestinians seeing the settler violence that's growing on the West Bank, in addition to the violence in Gaza, and the horror that many Palestinian communities are seeing with that violence having got worse while people's attention is elsewhere. I want to tell you a story of going to a hospital, a Palestinian hospital in East Jerusalem, going to a special ward being made for 3 little girls, triplets, who'd been born a few months previously. And as I held one of these little girls, I was told by the nurse that the mother had been allowed from Gaza to give birth to her children and then been forced to go back straight away to Gaza and had not been given permission to come back to be with her 3 babies. The horror of children being killed, of men and women being killed, of course, is beyond description, but just thinking of the trauma of those children not being able to be with their mother, those human stories that we see and hear of, that should touch our hearts and force us to redouble our efforts. It's why I and the Liberal Democrats have called for an immediate bilateral ceasefire 4 months now. We need that ceasefire so that killing can stop, so the aid can get in, so the hostages can be released, so we can start a peace process that gets to the 2-state solution that could be offered, so both Palestinians and Israelis could live side by side in peace, and Palestinian and Israeli children could grow up together in peace. We have to commit ourselves more than ever to strive for that. And I'm looking forward to His Holiness' speech to talk about what's happening and how we can play our role, all of us play our role. But I hope, and I'm sure he will, talk about how we need to commit ourselves to peace in the years ahead because of the huge dangers that are in this world. And the dangers come from us accepting division, accepting not standing up to extremism, not standing up to hatred. And we have to tackle that here at home so we are empowered for that peace. There is too much division sown by too many people. The rise of anti-Semitism since the 7th of October, the rise of Islamophobia since the 7th of October has been truly horrific in our own communities. And that's our responsibility. These aren't faraway things. These are things that we have to stand up and speak against. We have to follow the Ahmadiyya Muslim message of love for all, hatred for none. That is our obligation. As we listen to His Holiness later and as we drink and eat together tonight, let us commit ourselves to all play our part in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Ed Davey. We now come to the presentation of the Peace Prizes, the Ahmadiyya Muslim Prize for the Advancement of Peace, and I invite Mr. Rafiq Hayat to introduce the first recipient.
Thank you very much. The Ahmadiyya Muslim Prize for the Advancement of Peace is an international award that was launched by His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad in 2009. It is awarded in recognition of an individual or an organization's contribution to the advancements of the cause of peace. This award includes a check of £10,000. We've had winners from across the world, including Asia, America, Africa, Middle East, and Europe. This year, we are presenting 2 awards for 2020, which we were not able to present due to COVID, and the prize for 2023. It gives me great pleasure to share with you the 2020 recipient of the Ahmadiyya Muslim Peace Prize for the Advancement of Peace is Eddie Roach from Ireland. This was first announced at our annual convention in 2020 during the COVID restrictions. Eddie started her journey in the 1980s with the Irish Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and devised a peace education program that was delivered to several schools across Ireland. In 1990, she became the first Irish woman elected to the board of directors of the International Peace Bureau at the United Nations in Geneva, and in 1997 was a candidate for the presidency of Ireland. In 1991, she founded Chonable Children's Project International, which gives aids to children who have been deeply impacted by nuclear disaster. The organization raises approximately 1.9 million euros on an annual basis for children in Belarus, Western Russia, and Ukraine. Her organization went on to pioneer a groundbreaking adoption agreement between Ireland and Belarus, and due to the incredible efforts, she had enabled hundreds of children to be adopted in Ireland. Eddie continues to support the United Nations, specifically bringing awareness to the tragic consequences of Chernobyl, and she addressed the United Nations Assembly in 2016 regarding the matter and her work towards the cause. We are proud to welcome Addie, someone whose work has brought light to people's lives from a very dark situation. We congratulate Addie, and now we'll watch a small video of her work, which His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmad, head of the Ahmadi Muslim community, will present the prize thereafter.
On the 26th of April 1986, the world changed forever with the explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. It remains an unfolding and everlasting tragedy with medical, social, environmental and economic fallout. In the shadow of Chernobyl, thousands were born with genetic defects and fatal heart abnormalities.
When we first came here 8 years ago, I can't describe to you what we found here. Children who were dying, and the children were terrified of us, unused to human contact or touch. And I remember being completely and utterly overwhelmed by the magnitude and the scale of that.
What Irish volunteers saw here led to the founding of Chernobyl Children International. 37 years on, Adi Roach's Chernobyl Children International continues to be the world's greatest aid and advocacy agency on behalf of the victims of Chernobyl.
We now invite Adi to say a few words.
Salam alaikum from your neighbouring island of Ireland. Your Holiness, esteemed guests, it is my honour and my privilege to become a recipient of the Ahmadiyya Award today. And as I stand here, I am reminded of the prophetic words of that wonderful scientist Albert Einstein when he said, "The splitting of the atom has changed everything except our way of thinking, and thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe." These words reveal how Einstein foresaw what would happen on the 6th of August and the 9th of August 1945 on the innocents of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which led to the beginning of what we now call the nuclear arms race and the symbiotic relationship with nuclear power energy. And ultimately, Einstein's words shows that he foresaw what would eventually happen at 1:23 a.m. on the 26th of April 1986. An explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Ukraine, leading to what the United Nations deemed to be the greatest environmental catastrophe in the history of humanity. A new word, Chernobyl, entered the history of language, the history of world disasters, and indeed into the history of the world itself. Now, unfortunately, like many disasters, they pass quickly, out of sight, out of mind, relegated to the past. And for the people of Chernobyl, for them, it is a living reality for the survivors and the victims. And while, yes, Chernobyl has been consigned to the history books because the images of that tragedy are different to the deeply disturbing images of war and of famine, where we see the immediacy of the impact of drone attacks, bombs, bullets, starvation unleashed on humankind. However, the war that was unleashed and is raging from Chernobyl is silent, invisible, and deadly. No smell, no taste, nothing to forewarn you of the danger. This invisible enemy permeates every aspect of the cycle of life, from which there is no antidote, no escape, and no safe haven. And today, in humility, I can only offer you my truth, my witness, and the evidence of my heart. For I know what I have seen and continue to see: so many babies and children with poor health, such neglect and abandonment. And yet I can see such beauty, such innocence, and such potential that I am challenged to act and to reach out and say, here are my helping hands, and here are our sheltering arms, and here are our loving hearts. For it is a privilege to be invited into the life of a child and to be of some benefit to their scarred and broken bodies. And in many cases, it is intervene to save a child's life. That, my friends, is a rare and special privilege. And as in most tragedies, it is children who pay the highest price. Their small little bodies absorb adult doses of radioactivity. And those who are either in the womb or who were children in 1986 are the parents of 2024. And thus we see what is now known and acknowledged as Chernobyl lineage, as it passes from one generation to another in the genetics. So our work emphasizes two words: doing something. And that's what translates into an understanding that the power of our love for humanity can and does move mountains. And that's what brings me here today to this mosque. It brings us right to the heart of the matter. It is about children whose very existence depends on our response, whose lives are dangling in the balance, and the power of what we together can do to alleviate that suffering. And you know, sometimes it just takes two hands to take away fear and pain. And sometimes it takes a whole mosque full, and it takes a whole world of effort to end that suffering, because we together can stand up and speak out and give witness and be on that front line of humanitarian support. And that's just where we are, on the front line in Belarus and in Ukraine. And despite the wickedness of this 2-year-old war, we still achieve great things. We continue to deliver huge amounts of humanitarian aid to those who need it most. And we run alongside that all of our humanitarian programs in both countries, despite the war and despite the sanctions against Belarus. But the pinnacle of our work in this war continues to be our child cardiac surgical program. Despite the raging war, our surgeons and our nurses run the gauntlet of the war. 2 weeks into the war in 2022, we got in a surgical team because they knew that these babies and children would not survive because they were on the cusp of life and death, because they suffer from a condition surgeons call Chernobyl heart, which is not a condition a baby can live with, but will die with without surgical intervention. An example of this just in December past, the life of one such baby called Sasha. We intervened because the day our surgeons arrived, the local doctors were telling the parents to take their little baby Sasha home to die, that there was nothing they could do, she was inoperable. But our philosophy is that we work until the last breath. Even if that child or baby dies on the operating theatre, we will still fight for that life. What followed was a 14-hour surgery, during which baby Sasha bled the entire volume of blood in her body twice. But where there's life, there's hope, and she survived. Now that's what we are all about, because we believe in the power of the possible, and we do believe in miracles, because it is breath by breath, heartbeat by heartbeat. These babies and children, they put their little hearts and their hope in the hands of our surgeons, and we try and make a miracle happen. And events such as this, well, this acts as an inspiration, particularly to those of us who work on the front line. It restores our faith and our hope. And we say to those who feel abandoned and forgotten, to the people in Israel, to Gaza, to Syria, to Ukraine, to the Horn of Africa and beyond, we say to them that you are not forgotten, you are not irrelevant, you are not peripheral, for we believe together that there is nothing more precious in life than life itself. Let us together have hope to hope, because hope is the very essence of life itself. Hope is what we cling on to when we're trying to find our way. And I believe it is the most enabling gift of all. Together, we have come to break bread, to hope, to pray for peace. Together, let us show that love is alive and hope is also alive. And our compassion for the other is the heartbeat of our society. The power of our humanity is strong, and we can feel it in this room, in this mosque today. Because together, in that spirit of love in action, we can save the world by giving it that transfusion of love and also of hope, because we stand together on the side of peace, because we know that the power of our love can overcome the love of power. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Adi Roche. And I invite Mr. Rafiqiat to announce the second Peace Prize winner. Mr. Rafiqiat.
Thank you very much. The second presentation this year gives me great pleasure to announce the winner of the 2023 Ahmadiyya Muslim Peace Prize is David Spurdle from the UK. David was a teacher from Haunt Church in the UK when he visited Lebanon in 1983 during the Lebanese Civil War and saw firsthand the suffering of children who were in dire need of help. Motivated by his Christian faith, he committed, without knowing how he could manage, to care for 60 orphan boys, and then sought to find a sponsor to help fund care of the boys. With that, he founded the charity Kids Alive UK, that later became charity Stand By Me. Since then, the charity has rescued over 10,000 children across 11 countries and has opened 24 children's homes, 6 care centers, 7 schools, and has fed over 1,500 families a month. The charity helps by providing shelter, food, education, and health care for children with mixed or in-home support, where possible, and in family homes where that is only option to give children life chances. Whilst now retired, Mr. Spurtle still has strong links with this charity. The mission and work that was inspired by him continues to grow today at an international level. We're delighted to honour his work. The award also, as I mentioned, includes the prize of £10,000. We'll watch a short video of his work and then I'll request His Holiness to present him with the Peace Prize.
We rescue children, then we do whatever it takes to provide the love, care and attention they need to thrive. Our kids come from terrible backgrounds. Some are orphaned, some abused and some abandoned. They are born into the poorest communities, written off by society. But beyond their sadness, we see their potential. We stand by them for as long as they need and help them to become everything they were born to be. We are motivated by Jesus, who took action against injustice, fed the hungry, was a friend to the outcast and advocate for the vulnerable. We show love and acceptance to children that most need our help, regardless of belief, ethnicity or social status, and we always respect our children's identity, believing that faith is a personal choice. We make lasting improvements to children's lives. By investing our time, love and attention, we're raising children to know they are loved unconditionally for who they are. We tackle each and every obstacle our kids face, enabling them to access a life-changing education. We work hard to keep families together, but when needed, we provide kids with loving parents through our children's homes. We believe these kids can change everything. When our kids know they have our lasting support, they can rise above their circumstances, reach their full potential and go on to do great things. By providing the right support, we are proudly bringing up the next generation of builders, doctors, leaders and teachers in the areas we work in.
Peace and blessings. Just to acknowledge His Holiness and all you honoured guests, and to say what a privilege it is to be here this evening. As strange as it may sound, my peace story starts in the middle of the Lebanese Civil War in 1983. As a technology teacher with long holidays, I'd volunteered to lead a team to a boys' orphanage to repair the sewage work system that had been destroyed in the fighting. The situation was much worse than anything I had ever witnessed or imagined in my life. Buildings razed to the ground, checkpoints, gunfire, bombings, and extreme hardship. Ethnic cleansing, a regular occurrence. It was tough. We had little equipment or expertise, but things were slowly changing. But not just the sewage system. My life was changing too, as I learnt the boys' stories and of their harrowing backgrounds. Most had lost their parents. Some had even witnessed their parents killed by snipers, including one of my adopted sons. But they were loving and happy to see us, helping as best we could. I returned home to Essex and back to school, I'd done my bit for peace and humanity, or so I thought, but I was wrong. I had changed. I was so affected by my trip to Lebanon that I went back at Christmas on my own to be Santa Claus to the boys. I arrived secretly at the orphanage, got dressed as Father Christmas, and with a large sack of toys entered the dining room, said, "Ho, ho, ho," only to hear, "It's Dawud, it's Dawud." And I was immediately swamped by all the boys who I realized loved me, and I certainly loved them. And so I lived with 8 Muslim lads who had no families to go to. We had fun in our makeshift bomb shelter. We watched Jungle Book 17 times, and then Christmas Day arrived. Our dinner was a meagre affair, and I felt guilty as I had money in my back pocket that kept telling me to take the boys out. And then, somewhat reluctantly, I said, "Who wants to go out for dinner?" And immediately there was a loud, "Yes, please." Well, an hour later, as I and Mohammed and Fidel and Ahmed and Wissam and the other lads were about to enter a restaurant, a high-ranking Christian militia officer and his bodyguards emerged from the shadows. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Dawud," I said, thinking, we're in trouble. "Who are these kids?" I explained. "Why are you here?" "Celebrating Christmas," I said. "Do you know these kids are my enemy, and in years to come they may want to kill me?" There was silence for a moment. My heart was beating. Then he gave a command, and his soldiers escorted us into the restaurant. He bought us all the most amazing Christmas dinner. And before long, that hardened soldier was walking around the table, picking up each of the lads in turn and giving them a huge kiss as tears trickled down his face. Do you know, I could never have afforded that meal, but God didn't need my money. He had other plans. As we left that restaurant, the officer said to me, "Tell them in the years to come, their enemy bought them Christmas dinner today." Well, a few days later, after a night of heavy fighting, and as I was on my way to the airport and home, my driver took a wrong turning, and suddenly we were approaching a Hezbollah militia checkpoint. I now knew I was in real trouble. My heart was beating, and I was, once again, praying. The young soldier pointed his gun through the window, and again I heard the words, "Who are you?" "Dawud," came my reply again. I explained I had come to Beirut to care for Muslim boys. "Why?" he asked. "Because God wants me to," I said. He asked me if I knew the Queen. I've never sat next to a politician until tonight. He asked me about London, Manchester United. And then after 20 minutes of interrogation, he looked me in the eyes and said, "You are lucky. I'm letting you go." And so in the space of just a few days, from both Christian and Muslim militiamen, I and those I loved had witnessed mercy, compassion, and love. Our lives and freedoms had been spared. I came home changed, ready to start my journey of peace. I knew I had to act, and despite not having the personal means, I trusted God and committed to caring for the 60 boys. But again, God had greater plans. Eventually, I resigned my headship and founded Stand By Me in the shed at the bottom of the garden. I never imagined back then that my small steps of faith would have led Stand By Me into 7 countries, caring for thousands of children, from war-torn Myanmar to Ethiopia and on to Colombia. May I just say on behalf of Myanmar, another war, totally forgotten. On this incredible journey, I've been joined by outstanding supporters who have stood by me, helping us to rescue over 20,000 children from terrible circumstances. And may I just mention that one of my 3 Lebanese adopted sons is here tonight, Ahmed. I'm so proud of him and his family, and he is now the executive director of Stand By Me. From the slums of Beirut to the director of this amazing charity. The work goes on. Somebody mentioned that I was retired. Well, if you'd seen me last Saturday in Eldoret in Kenya rescuing a baby in a brown paper bag who'd been left by the roadside, you'd realise that it's a kind of retirement. If tonight you've been inspired by my story, then let each one of us determine to leave here and walk a walk of peace together to make this world a better and more peaceful place for all humanity. On behalf of our amazing kids who have overcome unbelievable challenges and triumphed, I humbly receive your award. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David Spurdle. I'd just like to quickly recognise some of our guests at the front table here. Seema Malhotra MP, Chris Cotton, Deputy Lord Lieutenant, James Sunderland MP, Robert Rehak, the Chair of the International Freedom and Belief Alliance, Fiona Bruce MP, Lord Ahmed, Minister at the Foreign Office, Chandrakant Araya, a Member of Parliament from Canada, and His Excellency Mr. Kariuki, the High Commissioner of Tanzania, amongst our many friends here today from 28 countries. It now gives me great pleasure and honour to invite the keynote speaker, His Holiness Hazrat Mirza Masroor Ahmed, the worldwide head of the Ahmadiyya Muslim community.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the gracious, ever merciful. All distinguished guests, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and blessing of Allah be upon you all. Today, once again, we have gathered together for this event hosted by the Ahmadiyya Muslim community to discuss and reflect upon how we can bridge division in society and establish genuine peace in the world. For over 2 decades, I have urged governments, politicians, and all people to play their roles in ensuring the social cohesion of our individual societies and the wider peace and harmony of the world. I have expressed my views on how we can bring an end to all forms of warfare, whether conflicts fought falsely in the name of religion or those which are overtly geopolitical. I have not only spoken of the pressing need to end wars between nations, but also to tackle the frustrations that exist locally within communities and to strive for peace in those nations where civil wars or internal disputes are rife. Certainly, history teaches us that internal conflicts can spiral into regional wars, often fueled by the interference and influence of external powers and ferment instability and division in other countries to serve their interests. In recent decades, we have witnessed the devastating consequences of such interference in countries such as Kuwait, Iraq, Syria, and Sudan. Above all, I have repeatedly warned that the unjust policies of the major powers and the unfair political, legal, and economic systems that have prevailed in much of the world are triggering an ever-rising tide of inequality. In much of the world are triggering an ever-rising tide of inequality, which in turn is fueling global instability and insecurity. Over the years, politicians, intellectuals, or members of the public have invariably agreed with my assertion that we must strive for peace. However, many also expressed their opinion, either directly or indirectly, that I was wrong to believe that existing conflicts could conceivably escalate into a global war and even trigger the use of nuclear weapons. Many considered this to be unnecessarily pessimistic. For a long time, even those intimately engaged in world affairs, such as politicians, foreign policy journalists, or analysts, did not agree with me, either due to their idealism and a desire to look at the world through rose-tinted glasses, or perhaps due to an incapability to learn lessons from history. They seemingly ignored the widening cracks that have been opening up in recent decades in international relations. Perhaps they simply did not wish to accept the reality of what was staring them in the face. As they say, ignorance is bliss. Yet, today, as wars rage here in Europe, the Middle East, and elsewhere, many of the same people are now raising the alarm, warning of a global war in which nuclear weapons could be used to wreak an unimaginable devastation on the world. Despite this realization, many still seem unwilling to consider what must be done to end these conflicts and remain reluctant to hear the genuine voices for peace that exist in the world. Given this, as I thought about today's event, I wondered whether there was any point in us gathering here again. What benefit was there for us to speak about peace and justice if those with the power and ability to influence change were determined not to hear us? The stark reality is that even those institutions founded with the primary objective of maintaining the peace and security of the world are becoming increasingly irrelevant. For example, the United Nations has become a weak and almost powerless body where a few dominant nations wield all the power and easily override the views of the majority. Instead of deciding each issue based on its facts and merits, nations have formed alliances and vote according to their self-interests. Ultimately, critical decisions are made by a few privileged nations in whose hands rests the veto power. Instead of faithfully serving the cause of peace and justice, they wield their veto like a trump card wherever their narrow interests are threatened, irrespective of whether their decision shatters the peace and prosperity of other nations and leads to the death and destruction of scores of innocent people. Let it be clear, therefore, that where a veto power exists, the scales of justice can never be balanced. Nonetheless, despite these reservations, I realized that I must use this opportunity to speak because Islam teaches Muslims never to waver in the pursuit of peace. It teaches us to speak the truth so that when held accountable before Allah the Almighty, a believer can truthfully claim to have tried his utmost to save his creation from destruction. Furthermore, the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, has stated that the greatest form of jihad, a term that is consistently misunderstood and misrepresented, is to speak truthfully and courageously before one's leaders, especially those who are hard-hearted, unjust, and cruel. Certainly, if weaker nations or individuals like myself, who have no political affiliation, try to speak up, it is rarely appreciated, and those who do can face difficulties or risk sanctions. Despite this, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, based on the teachings of Islam, continues and will always continue to strive earnestly in the cause of peace and champion the rights of those who are powerless and are the victims of injustice. We will, God willing, constantly endeavor to use whatever means we have to influence those within our reach, be they politicians, policymakers, intellectuals, and others, towards establishing peace in the world. Indeed, some of you may well be aware of the consistent efforts our community is making to foster peace and to alleviate the suffering of those who are in grave physical or emotional distress. And so, after these introductory words, I now wish to offer my thought on how to establish peace in the world. As far as religion is concerned, none of the founder of the major religions, whether Prophet Jesus, Prophet Moses, or any other prophet of God, nor the founder of Islam, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, ever taught that their followers to disregard the peace of society and to resort to injustice or aggression. While it is true that in certain extreme circumstances they permitted the use of limited force, it was always exerted solely with the intention of ending warfare and oppression. As for Islam, it literally means peace, and every aspect of its teachings reflect this meaning. For instance, in chapter 42, verse 41 of the Holy Quran, Allah the Almighty commands that where a person or nation has been wronged, they must never respond disproportionately or stray into realm of seeking revenge. Furthermore, Allah says that it is better to forgive if it can lead to reformation. Chapter 49, verse 10 of the Holy Quran says that if two nations are at war, neutral parties should mediate between them and strive to establish peace based on the principles of justice and equity. If having reconciled, one party violates the terms of the agreement and again resort to warfare, other nations should forcefully unite against the aggressor until it desists from its aggressive conduct. Once it stops, the other nations must also cease using force. The objective should always remain to build sustainable peace underpinned by justice. It should not be that a third party take advantage of the vulnerability of the warring parties by usurping their rights for his own benefit. If this principle were observed at the United Nations and other relevant bodies, conflicts would be resolved far more amicably and swiftly. However, it will prove impossible for true peace to emerge so long as nations, either directly or through their powerful allies, can utilize a veto power. Regrettably, due to its inherent lack of justice, the fate of the United Nations seems set to mirror that of its failed predecessor, the League of Nations. And if the system of international law, weak as it may be, completely collapses, the resulting anarchy and destruction is beyond our comprehension. Whilst there are myriad of conflicts taking place in the world, the most pressing and dangerous are those taking place between Israel and Hamas and the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. Some people may believe or may have been conditioned to think that the conflict between Israel and Palestine is a religious war. However, in reality, it is a geopolitical and territorial conflict. As for the war in Ukraine, it is very evidently a geopolitical war being fought for territorial reasons. I firmly believe there is only one way to end these wars: by ensuring that justice prevails and that whatever settlements are made are based on equity, as opposed to what better serves the interests of external powers. Otherwise, there is no benefit to the United Nations or international laws, and the only rule that shall hold weight will be the one that declares might is right. In terms of the Ukraine war, Russia has a veto power at the UN Security Council, whilst in effect Ukraine also has won by virtue of its alliance with those Western nations who have permanent membership of the Security Council. How can a settlement be agreed if both sides can effectively wield a veto? Why would either party be motivated to move even an inch if they know they can veto any deal not weighted entirely in their favor? As for what is happening in Gaza, though both the Israelis and the Palestinians have their supporters, the veto power has only been used in Israel's favor since the current war ignited several months ago. For example, in February, 13 out of 15 members of the UN Security Council voted in favor of an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, but the United Nations utilized its veto, United States utilized its veto power, and the resolution was defeated. How can peace be established where the majority view is so easily discarded? That is not justice. Instead, it is a rejection of democracy and principle of equality. Contrary to these man-made laws, Islam's teachings emphasize justice to such a degree that chapter 5, verse 9 of the Holy Quran states that the enmity of any nation or people must never incite one to deviate from the path of justice and fairness. Manifesting such integrity is nearer to righteousness. Even non-religious people will surely recognize the wisdom and benefit of adopting this preeminent standard of justice. At the same time, you may wonder why, if Islam's teachings are as I am describing, is it often alleged that Islam is an extremist religion. Indeed, this debate has come to the surface again in recent days due to inflammatory and misguided comments by certain politicians. In this regard, it should be categorically clear that the wars and battles fought by the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, and his rightly guided successors were entirely defensive. The Holy Quran permitted the Muslims to fight back only as a last resort after they had been mercilessly attacked by the opponents of Islam and been the victims of years of sustained persecution. This permission is enshrined in chapter 22, verse 40 of the Holy Quran, which states that those upon whom war is forced unjustly have a right to defend themselves because they have been wronged and are the victims of oppression and persecution. Moreover, the Holy Quran clarifies that permission to fight back was granted not just to defend Islam, but to defend all religions and to enshrine the principles of freedom of conscience and freedom of belief. Thus, in subsequent verse, Allah the Almighty states that if He did not stop those who transgress by means of others, then churches, synagogues, temples, mosques, and all other places of worship where the name of God is oft recited would be destroyed. Hence, Muslims are commanded to defend and protect all religions and places of worship rather than cause them any harm. Furthermore, wherever the conditions for defensive wars were met, the Muslim armies were governed by stringent rules of engagement given by the Holy Prophet of Islam, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him. Firstly, he stated that wars must never be fought to fulfill personal or vested interests, to conquer lands, or to establish supremacy over others. Rather, Muslims are only permitted to fight if war was waged upon them. In the event of war, other nations should unite to stop the aggressor. Once the aggressor ceases to use force, the other nations should immediately end the war and seek to establish lasting peace. In addition, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, strictly forbade targeting civilians, something all too common in the wars being fought in the modern world. Further, he instructed Muslims to ensure the scope of the war remained as limited as possible. All forms of escalation or expansion of the war, both in terms of territory and means, were to be avoided. Islam also teaches that unless one's opponent uses a place of worship as a military base, it is not permissible to violate the sanctity of a place of worship by fighting within it or even near it. It is strictly forbidden to knock down or desecrate the places of worship of your opponents. Further, the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, forbade the previously common practice of mutilating the bodies of enemy soldiers and instructed that their bodies were to be treated with care and respect. He also taught that no form of deception was permitted in warfare. As already outlined, women, children, the elderly, and other innocent civilians were never to be targeted. Similarly, priests, rabbis, or other religious leaders were not to be harmed or prevented from carrying out their religious duties. The Holy Prophet of Islam, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, also prohibited Muslim soldiers from inflicting any form of terror or fear amongst the general public during wars. Indeed, all non-combatant and civilians were to be treated kindly and no injustice was to be perpetrated against them. Furthermore, he instructed that Muslim armies should not make bases or camps in towns or areas where they would cause anxiety or discomfort to ordinary civilians. He stated that during battle, soldiers should not strike their opponents in the face and should cause them the least possible harm and distress. If prisoners of war were caught, they were not to be separated from their relatives if they too were imprisoned. Additionally, every effort was to be made to make prisoners of war comfortable to the extent that their comfort and needs were to be prioritized over those of the captor. If a Muslim was guilty of any form of cruelty or harshness towards a prisoner of war, they were to release him immediately to make amends. Another instruction of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, was that the representatives or emissaries or other nations should be held in high esteem, and any mistakes or discourtesies on their part ought to be ignored in the interest of peace and harmony. And so these are the basic Islamic rules of war, and the Holy Prophet, peace and blessing of Allah be upon him, said that if a Muslim violated these principles, it demonstrated that they were not fighting for justice. Instead, they were fighting to inflict cruelty and out of self-interest. Without a doubt, every Muslim nation and government must abide by these Islamic teachings. Setting aside religion, I also believe if non-Muslim nations adopted these principles, then even if wars occurred, they would not lead to such deep-rooted enmities forming that remained embedded generation after generation. So all nations involved in warfare, be they Western nations, those who harbor enmity for the Islamic world, or Muslim countries, should recognize that peace can only be established if they act upon these principles of warfare and conflict resolution. Otherwise, we lie at the precipice of a catastrophic global war that will undoubtedly lead to such immense levels of destruction and carnage that lie far beyond our imagination. As I said earlier, many people are now reaching the same conclusion. For example, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, a highly respected economist from Columbia University, writes, "The world is on the edge of nuclear catastrophe, in no small part because of the failure of Western political leaders to be forthright about the causes of the escalating global conflicts." He continues, "The relentless Western narrative that the West is noble while Russia and China are evil is simple-minded and extraordinarily dangerous. It is an attempt to manipulate public opinion, not to deal with very real and pressing diplomacy." Professor Sachs continues, "Above all, at this time of extreme danger, European leaders should pursue the true source of European security, not US hegemony, but European security arrangements that respect the legitimate security interests of all European nations, certainly including Ukraine, but also including Russia, which continues to resist NATO enlargements into the Black Sea. At this stage, diplomacy, not military escalation, is the true path to European and global security." Furthermore, much has been written or spoken about the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas and the grave humanitarian situation in Gaza that worsens by the day. For example, during a recent interview, US Senator Bernie Sanders, who himself is Jewish, strongly condemned the actions of the Israeli government. He said, "What Netanyahu and his right-wing government are doing right now to the people of Palestine, of Gaza, is indescribable and unspeakable. I mean, we are looking at 25 to 26,000 people who have been killed already." This was the figure when he wrote this or he interviewed. Now this figure has gone beyond this number. 2/3 of whom are women and children. 65,000 people have been wounded. We are looking at 70% of the housing units in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed. You are looking at 1.8 million people pushed out of their homes. God knows where they are going. Senator Sanders continued by saying, "Right now, and I hope everybody hears this, you are looking at the possibility of hundreds of thousands of children starving to death. And we in the United States, through our financial support of Israel, are complicit in what is happening. And I will be damned if I am going to give another nickel to the Netanyahu government in order to continue this war against the Palestinian people. Asked if and how a settlement could be reached in the Middle East, Senator Sanders said, "The history of the region is terrible. It deals with the Holocaust, 6 million Jews. It deals with the displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes. But at the end of the day, the Palestinian people are entitled to a homeland of their own, so we are talking about a two-state solution." In addition to the two people I have quoted, many other commentators are now reaching the same conclusion about the critical state of the world I have long warned of. I take no satisfaction in this. Rather, with all my heart, I hope and pray that before it is too late, the world comes to its senses and brings an end to the brutalities and wars taking place in the world. Certainly, it is my opinion that there should be a full ceasefire between Israel and Hamas or Palestine, and also in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Thereafter, instead of inciting their respective allies towards further warfare, all members of the international community should prioritize ensuring relief effort or stepped up to help those in desperate need and focus on bringing about a lasting and peaceful settlement. If instead we stand by and let these wars escalate further, countless more innocent lives will be lost. And surely history will judge us with contempt as the author of our own destruction and misery. And so, in conclusion, if we wish to save our future generation from being born with the ill effects of radiation caused by nuclear warfare and desire to save them from deprivation and desperation, and if we wish to save ourselves from their curses and laments, from their curses and laments, we must act with urgency and wisdom. Political leaders and those who have access to policymakers must take a long-term view of what is in the best interest of mankind, rather than being blinded by selfish desires to assert their superiority over others. We must all come together, setting aside national, political, and other vested interests for the greater good of humanity, and to ensure that we leave behind a prosperous world for our future generations. It is the need of the time that we must focus all our energies and efforts on establishing true peace so that we may live in a world of hope and prosperity rather than a world defined by inequality, hatred, and bloodshed. With these words, I sincerely thank all of our guests for joining us this evening and listening to what I had to say. I apologize for speaking at length, but I felt it necessary to do so given the precarious state of the world. Thank you, and once again, I express my sincere appreciation to you all. Thank you very much.
We will now conclude the formal programme with silent prayer. His Holiness will lead us in silent prayer. We pray by raising our hands, and you may join us in any manner you feel comfortable.
Silent prayer. Amen.